Daniel thought he had it all, a successful career and a loving marriage, until he discovered his wife's emotional affair with a coworker. What began as subtle changes in her behavior unraveled into a devastating betrayal that shook their foundation. As tensions rose and secrets surfaced, the couple faced painful confrontations, emotional turmoil, and the daunting question: could their relationship survive such a breach of trust? Through moments of heartbreak, difficult decisions, and unexpected twists, this story explores the depths of betrayal and the resilience of love. Will they find a way to rebuild what was lost, or is this the end? The year was 2017, and life in Meadowbrook Heights, a quiet suburban town nestled just outside Boston, moved at its usual pace. The neighborhood was a picturesque blend of tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and houses that seemed plucked straight from the pages of a real estate brochure. For most of the residents, life was predictably pleasant. Daniel Harper was one of those residents, a 39-year-old architect with a reputation for meticulous designs and an eye for detail. Daniel had built more than just structures. He had built a life that many admired. Married for 13 years to Emily, a bright and compassionate teacher at the local elementary school, they seemed like the quintessential couple. Daniel had always been pragmatic, a planner through and through. His days were structured, his routines precise, and his ambitions clear. Emily, on the other hand, was his perfect counterbalance. She brought spontaneity into his life, her love for small surprises and light-hearted moments, adding color to his otherwise methodical world. Despite their busy lives, they had their rituals. Sunday mornings were sacred, a time to linger over breakfast and share their thoughts on everything from the latest books Emily was reading to Daniel's current architectural projects. They laughed often, especially about the quirks of their lives. Emily's uncanny ability to recall her students' antics and Daniel's obsession with keeping his car spotless were frequent sources of teasing. Yet, even in their seemingly idyllic life, cracks were beginning to form, subtle enough to go unnoticed at first, but growing steadily over time. Daniel's work at a high-profile firm demanded more of his attention. Long nights spent in the office, constant travel to client sites, and the mounting pressure to deliver on high-stakes projects left him drained. Emily, too, had her challenges. Teaching was her passion, but it was also exhausting. Balancing lesson plans, parent-teacher conferences, and the emotional weight of her students' struggles took its toll. Their conversations, once filled with warmth and curiosity, had become more practical. Grocery lists, schedules, and home maintenance replaced the dreamy musings of their earlier years. Emily tried to bridge the distance, suggesting date nights or weekend getaways, but Daniel often dismissed them with a simple, "maybe next time." The first real shift came in the form of a new addition to Daniel's office, a junior designer named Claire Fresh out of grad school. Claire was ambitious, vibrant, and unapologetically confident. She had a knack for making her presence known. Whether it was through her bold design choices or her infectious laughter echoing through the office, Daniel, initially indifferent, found himself impressed by her fresh perspective. Claire, too, seemed drawn to Daniel, but not in a way that raised alarm bells. She respected his expertise, often seeking his advice on projects. Their interactions were professional, though Daniel couldn't help but notice her admiration. It was flattering, a reminder of the younger, more carefree version of himself. He chalked it up to harmless office dynamics. Emily, however, sensed a subtle change in Daniel. He was more distracted, more engrossed in his phone even during the rare evenings they spent together. When she asked about work, his responses were brief, almost rehearsed. It wasn't enough to cause suspicion, but it was enough to make her wonder. One evening, Emily suggested they host a small dinner party for Daniel's colleagues. It was her way of reconnecting with him, of stepping into his world and understanding the pressures he faced. Daniel hesitated, citing how busy everyone was, but Emily persisted, and eventually, he relented. The night of the dinner party was a whirlwind of activity. Emily spent hours preparing the menu, ensuring every detail was perfect. When the guests arrived, she greeted them warmly, her natural charm putting everyone at ease. Daniel introduced her to Claire, who stood out with her striking red dress and effervescent energy. Emily noticed how Claire seemed to linger near Daniel throughout the evening, their conversations animated. She dismissed it as office camaraderie. Daniel was well liked after all. But a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that Claire's laughter was a touch too frequent, her compliments a bit too personal. After the guests had left, Emily mentioned Claire casually. "She's certainly spirited," she said, hoping to gauge Daniel's reaction. He shrugged, offering a neutral response. "She's talented, one of the best on the team." Emily let it go, but the seed of unease had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's late nights at the office became more frequent. Emily, busy with the end-of-term activities at school, tried not to dwell on it. She reminded herself that they'd been through demanding times before and had always come out stronger. Still, the distance between them felt more pronounced. It was a Saturday morning when Emily decided to surprise Daniel by bringing him lunch at the office. She knew he'd been working tirelessly on a major project, and she thought a simple gesture might brighten his day. As she approached the building, she spotted Daniel through the glass windows of the conference room. He wasn't alone. Claire was with him, her hand resting lightly on his arm as she laughed at something he'd said. The sight stopped Emily in her tracks. It wasn't the gesture itself. It was the familiarity, the ease between them, that struck her. She debated whether to go in, but decided against it, turning back toward her car with a growing sense of uncertainty. At home, Emily tried to push the image from her mind. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. She and Daniel had built a life together, one that couldn't be undone by a fleeting moment of doubt. But as the days passed, she couldn't ignore the shift in her own emotions. For the first time in years, she felt truly disconnected from the man she loved. For Daniel, the growing tension at home was almost imperceptible. He was too consumed with work, with deadlines that loomed large and a team that relied on him. His interactions with Claire had evolved. They were no longer just about work. She had a way of making him feel understood, of validating the parts of him that Emily no longer seemed to notice. It wasn't intentional, or so he told himself. It was simply easy. The first real boundary was crossed on a rainy evening after an office celebration. Most of the team had left, but Daniel and Claire stayed behind, reviewing plans for an upcoming project. The mood was light, the conversation flowing effortlessly. When Claire reached out to touch his hand as she made a point, Daniel didn't pull away. The line between harmless and dangerous had blurred. As the weeks rolled on, Daniel found himself treading a dangerous line he never thought he'd approach. Claire had become more than a colleague. Their late nights at the office blurred into moments of quiet connection that felt, to Daniel, both thrilling and deeply wrong. It wasn't about love, at least not yet. It was about feeling seen, admired, and understood in a way he hadn't in years. Emily, meanwhile, wasn't oblivious to the growing distance. She noticed how Daniel's responses to her questions about work were shorter, how his smiles felt rehearsed, and how the warmth they once shared seemed to be slipping away. But instead of confronting him directly, she internalized her fears. After all, this was Daniel, the man who had always been her rock. Surely, she thought, he couldn't be capable of betraying her trust. One Saturday evening, Emily decided to surprise Daniel again, this time by inviting him out for dinner at their favorite restaurant. It was the kind of place they used to frequent during their dating years, a small Italian spot with candles on every table and the best tiramisu in town. Daniel hesitated when she suggested it. He had a mountain of work to do, or so he claimed, but something in her tone made him agree. As they sat across from each other that night, The flicker of the candle between them seemed to illuminate how far apart they'd grown. Emily tried to bridge the gap, asking about his projects, sharing stories about her students, and reminiscing about their early years together. Daniel responded politely, but his mind was elsewhere, specifically on the text he'd received from Claire just before dinner. The text wasn't overtly inappropriate, but it was suggestive enough to linger in his thoughts. Thinking about our conversation today, can't wait for Monday. He felt his phone buzz in his pocket again, but he ignored it, knowing that Emily would notice if he checked. Still, the pull of that message overshadowed the warmth of the dinner. Emily, sensing his distraction, leaned forward and placed her hand on his. "Daniel, are you happy?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with vulnerability. He looked up, startled by the question. "Of course I am," he said quickly, too quickly. "Why would you ask that?" "Because—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Lately you've felt distant. Like you're here, but not really here." Daniel withdrew his hand, reaching for his glass of wine instead. "It's just work, Emily. You know how demanding things have been." She nodded, but the knot in her chest tightened. "I do," she said quietly. "I just hope we're not losing ourselves in the process." The rest of the dinner was pleasant enough, but the tension between them lingered. As they left the restaurant, Emily glanced at Daniel and wondered if she'd made a mistake by not pressing him further. For his part, Daniel told himself he needed to try harder, to be present for Emily, to put distance between himself and Claire. But even as he resolved to do better, a part of him resisted letting go of the connection he'd found in Claire. A few days later, the situation came to a head. Daniel and Claire were working late again, going over plans for an important client presentation. The office was empty, except for the two of them, and the quiet made their proximity feel more intimate than it should have. As they reviewed the blueprints, Claire leaned over his shoulder, her perfume subtle but intoxicating. "You know," she said softly, "I don't think I've ever worked with someone who's as brilliant as you are." Daniel smiled, the compliment hitting him harder than it should have. "Thanks, Claire. That means a lot." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Do you ever wonder if you're appreciated enough by the people who should appreciate you the most?" Daniel turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I just mean, you give so much of yourself, Daniel, to your work, to your family. Do they see how incredible you are, or do they just take it for granted?" Her words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Daniel wanted to dismiss them, to laugh them off as nothing more than idle flattery. But he didn't. Instead, he found himself leaning into the validation, craving it in a way that scared him. Before he could respond, Claire placed a hand lightly on his arm. "You deserve to feel appreciated. Daniel. Truly appreciated." The moment stretched, charged with a tension neither of them dared to break. Finally, Daniel stood up, putting distance between them. "We should get back to work," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Claire nodded, but the look in her eyes told him she wasn't giving up. At home, Emily's suspicions had begun to solidify. She noticed how Daniel seemed more withdrawn than ever, how he spent more time at the office than seemed necessary, and how his phone was always just out of reach. As if he didn't want her to see it. One evening, while Daniel was in the shower, she picked up his phone, her hands trembling as she unlocked it. She didn't want to invade his privacy, but her gut told her something was wrong. And then she saw it. The text messages from Claire. They weren't overtly romantic, but the tone was unmistakable. The casual familiarity, the inside jokes, the late-night timestamps. It all pointed to something Emily couldn't ignore. When Daniel emerged from the bathroom, Emily was waiting for him, his phone in her hand. "Do you want to explain this?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Daniel froze, his face a mask of guilt. Emily, it's not what it looks like. Then what is it, Daniel? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me, to us. He took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. Claire and we're just colleagues, that's all. Colleagues don't send each other messages like this, she said, holding up the phone. And they certainly don't make their spouses feel invisible. The room fell silent, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on both of them. Finally, Emily said, I need to know the truth, Daniel. All of it, because if you can't be honest with me now, I don't see how we move forward. Daniel looked at her, the woman he'd loved for so many years, and felt a crushing sense of regret. He knew he had crossed a line, even if it wasn't a physical one. But the truth, once spoken, would change everything. This is a good time to remind you to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you're enjoying this story. We've got more twists and turns coming up, and you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Emily's demand for the truth hung in the air, a challenge Daniel couldn't easily dismiss. He stood there, paralyzed by the weight of his decisions. The silence stretched on until Emily's voice broke it again. Quieter now, almost pleading. Daniel, if you love me, if you ever loved me, you owe me honesty. Daniel hesitated, the excuses swirling in his mind, feeling weak in the face of her desperation. Emily, He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't supposed to get this far. Her expression crumpled, tears filling her eyes. So it is something I knew. I knew something was going on, but I didn't want to believe it. It's not what you think, Daniel said quickly, taking a step toward her. There's nothing physical. Nothing like that, I swear. Emily's laugh was bitter, sharp. Nothing physical. That's supposed to make me feel better. You've been lying to me, confiding in her, letting her have parts of you that used to be mine. Daniel dropped his gaze, guilt burning through him. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he hadn't meant for it to happen. But every word felt hollow. Do you love her? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Daniel said firmly. It's not about love, it's complicated. Complicated, she repeated, her tone filled with disbelief. Complicated is what people say when they don't want to admit the truth. You've betrayed me, Daniel. Whether you crossed some imaginary line or not, you betrayed me. Over the next few days, the house felt like a battlefield. Emily moved through her routines with a robotic precision, avoiding Daniel whenever possible. He tried to bridge the gap, offering to talk, but she brushed him off with a curt, "Not now." At night, the silence in their bedroom was deafening. Daniel slept on the couch more often than not, knowing that sharing a bed with Emily was no longer an option. Claire, oblivious to the chaos she'd triggered, continued to text Daniel. He ignored most of her messages, but one evening, after a particularly cold interaction with Emily, he found himself responding. She suggested they meet to talk things through, and against his better judgment, he agreed. They met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from the prying eyes of their colleagues or anyone who might know them. Claire arrived first, her smile bright but tinged with concern. "You look awful," she said, her tone gentle. "Thanks," Daniel replied dryly, taking a seat across from her. "I mean it," she said, leaning forward. "What's going on? You've been distant and I feel like I've done something wrong." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "You haven't done anything wrong, it's just Emily found out about our messages about how close we've been." Claire's expression shifted, a mix of guilt and defiance. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her the truth," Daniel said, "that nothing physical has happened, but that doesn't make it okay. She's devastated, Claire. And honestly, I don't blame her. Claire reached out, placing her hand on his. Daniel, I never wanted to cause trouble for you. I care about you. And I thought maybe you felt the same. Her touch was warm, comforting. But it also felt like a weight pressing down on him. He pulled his hand away gently. I don't know what I feel anymore, he admitted. But I can't keep doing this, whatever this is. Claire's face fell, but she nodded. I understand if you need space, I'll give it to you. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself, okay? Daniel nodded, grateful for her understanding. But as he left the cafe, he couldn't shake the feeling that the damage had already been done. Back at home, Emily was waiting for him. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Where were you? She asked, her voice calm but tight. Out, Daniel replied, setting his keys on the counter. I needed some air. Don't lie to me, she said, her eyes narrowing. Were you with her? Daniel hesitated, the truth caught in his throat. Finally, he nodded. I was, but it wasn't what you think. I told her it was over, that we can't keep doing this. Emily laughed again, that bitter edge returning. And I'm supposed to believe that you just suddenly decided to end things out of the goodness of your heart? It's the truth, Daniel said, his voice rising in frustration. I know I messed up, Emily, but I'm trying to fix it. Fix it? She repeated, her tone incredulous. You think you can fix this after everything you've put me through? Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Emily held up a hand, stopping him. I don't want to hear it, she said. I'm done listening to excuses. I'm done feeling like I'm not enough. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Daniel standing there, the weight of her words sinking in. The tension reached its breaking point 2 days later. Daniel came home from work to find Emily sitting on the couch, a suitcase by her side. I'm leaving, she said simply, not looking up. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Emily, wait, please don't do this. She stood, finally meeting his eyes. I have to, Daniel. I can't stay here and pretend like everything's okay. I need time space. Something to help me figure out if we even have a chance at fixing this. Daniel stepped closer, his voice softening. Emily, I love you. I know I've been selfish, and I know I've hurt you. But please, don't give up on us. Tears filled her eyes, but she shook her head. I'm not giving up, Daniel, but I can't stay here right now. I need to take care of myself. She picked up her suitcase and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back to him. I hope you find whatever it is you've been looking for. But I need to do the same. The door closed behind her, leaving Daniel alone in the house that now felt unbearably empty. This is a good moment to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sharing your thoughts helps us continue bringing you these gripping stories, so let us know what you think so far. With Emily gone, Daniel found himself alone with his thoughts, a painful silence filling the house they once shared. He walked from room to room, haunted by memories of the life they had built together. Every corner seemed to carry echoes of her laughter, her touch, her presence. Now it was just him, and the weight of everything he'd done. At work, things were no better. Word of Claire and Daniel's closeness had started to circulate, though neither of them had openly acknowledged it. Colleagues exchanged knowing glances, whispered conversations stopping abruptly when Daniel entered a room. Claire tried to maintain her usual bright demeanor, but even she seemed to sense the shift in how others viewed her. Their relationship, or whatever it had been, was no longer private. It was a shadow looming over them both. Daniel avoided Claire as much as possible, throwing himself into work in an effort to escape the turmoil. But the guilt gnawed at him, and the absence of Emily made it impossible to ignore. He started coming home late, not because he had anywhere to go, but because the house felt suffocating. One evening, as he sat at the dining table with a half-finished glass of whiskey, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "I've been thinking, can we meet to talk? Just to figure out where we stand." Relief flooded through him. This was his chance, maybe his only chance to make things right. He responded immediately, agreeing to meet the following evening at a small cafe halfway between her temporary apartment and their home. When Daniel arrived, Emily was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea. She looked tired, her face drawn, but there was a calm determination in her posture. He hesitated for a moment before walking over, his heart pounding. "Hi," he said, sitting down across from her. "Hi," she replied, her voice steady but guarded. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Daniel fidgeted with the edge of his sleeve, while Emily stared down at her cup, as though gathering her thoughts. Finally, she looked up. "I'm not here to rehash everything, Daniel. I've gone over it all in my head 100 times already, and it doesn't change anything. What I need to know is, do you even want to fix this? Do you want us?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Emily, I love you. I know I've messed up, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Her expression softened, but the hurt in her eyes was still evident. "Love isn't enough, Daniel. You've made me feel invisible for years. And then Claire. She's not just a symptom of a broken marriage. She's a choice you made over and over again." Daniel felt the sting of her words but nodded. "You're right. I chose wrong. And I regret it more than I can say. I let my frustrations and insecurities push me away from you. And I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm here now, Emily. I'm here. And I'm asking for another chance." Emily leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "And what happens when things get hard again? How do I know you won't just turn to someone else instead of coming to me?" "You don't," he admitted, his voice breaking. "You don't. All I can do is show you every day that I'm committed to us. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job if that's what it takes. Just don't give up on me, on us." Emily looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know, Daniel. I want to believe you, but I'm scared of letting myself trust you again." The conversation ended without a clear resolution. They agreed to give each other more time and space to process everything, but it was clear the road ahead would be anything but easy. Daniel left the cafe feeling both hopeful and terrified. He had a chance, a slim one, to rebuild what he'd broken. But he also knew that one misstep could destroy it all for good. At the office, the atmosphere grew more tense. The investigation into Claire's recent work uncovered discrepancies in her handling of client data. While there was no evidence implicating Daniel directly, the association with her tarnished his reputation. Upper management called him in for a meeting, making it clear they expected him to maintain a strictly professional distance from Claire moving forward. Claire, feeling the walls closing in, confronted Daniel after the meeting. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're just going to shut me out, like none of this meant anything?" "Claire, I can't do this anymore," Daniel said, his tone firm but regretful. "I've already hurt too many people. This has to stop." Her expression turned cold. "You're just saving your own skin, aren't you? Fine. Go ahead and be the good guy, Daniel, but don't pretend you're not just as guilty as I am." With that, she stormed out of the office, leaving Daniel feeling both relieved and deeply ashamed. Emily, meanwhile, had started seeing a therapist to work through her own emotions. She realized that her pain wasn't just about Daniel's actions. It was also about the way she had lost herself in their marriage. For years, she had prioritized his needs, his career, their life together, at the expense of her own happiness. Now, for the first time, she was asking herself what she wanted. One evening, she called Daniel, her voice hesitant. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, "about us, about me." "And?" Daniel asked, holding his breath. "I think we need to go to counseling together," she said. "If we're going to have any chance of fixing this, we need help." Daniel felt a surge of relief. Absolutely whatever it takes. Their first session was awkward, to say the least. Sitting across from a stranger and airing their grievances felt strange and uncomfortable, but the therapist guided them through it. Emily spoke openly about her feelings of neglect and betrayal, while Daniel admitted to his insecurities and the ways he had let his work and pride come between them. Over time, the sessions began to feel less daunting. They started to understand each other in ways they hadn't in years. Daniel realized how deeply he had wounded Emily, not just with Claire but with his emotional absence long before that Emily, in turn, began to see the pressures Daniel had placed on himself. Pressures he'd never shared with her. But forgiveness wasn't immediate trust. Once broken, isn't easily repaired. They had good days and bad days, moments of connection, followed by moments of doubt. Slowly, though, they started to rebuild, brick by brick. Meanwhile, Claire's departure from the company brought its own challenges. Rumors circulated about why she left, with some speculating about her relationship with Daniel. He did his best to rise above it, focusing instead on his work and his marriage. But the whispers never completely faded, a constant reminder of the choices he'd made. At home, Daniel and Emily began to find small ways to reconnect. They started having dinner together again, talking about their days like they used to. On weekends, they took long walks, rediscovering the quiet joys of each other's company. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily reached for Daniel's hand. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "But I think we're worth fighting for." Daniel squeezed her hand, his voice filled with emotion. "We are, Emily. We absolutely are. Life doesn't offer clean endings, and their story was no exception. The scars of their struggles remained, but so did the love that had brought them together in the first place. They knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, they faced them together. If you're still here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We've got more stories like this coming, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on Daniel and Emily's journey. Daniel and Emily's counseling sessions were helping, but the road to healing wasn't smooth. Every step forward felt like it was accompanied by an invisible tether, pulling them back to the past. The spectre of Daniel's betrayal, though unspoken in their day-to-day lives, hovered over them like a storm cloud. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Emily broke the silence in the car. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't have to ask who she meant. "No," he said. "Not anymore. I've let her go, Emily, I swear." Emily nodded, but her expression remained unreadable. "I want to believe you, I really do. But sometimes, it feels like a part of you is still elsewhere, like you're not fully here with me." "I'm here," Daniel said quickly. "Emily, I'm here. I know I don't deserve your trust right now, but I'm trying. I'm trying so hard." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, nodding again. "I know you are, and I'm trying too." The real turning point came a few weeks later, when Daniel was called into a late meeting at work. He arrived at the conference room expecting the usual routine, only to find himself facing two of his superiors and a representative from HR. "We've completed our review of the incidents surrounding Claire's tenure here," one of the superiors began, his tone measured but serious. "And while we don't have evidence to suggest you were complicit in her actions, your relationship with her has raised questions about your judgment." Daniel's stomach dropped. "I've already explained everything," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There was nothing inappropriate about our working relationship. Daniel, This isn't just about appearances, the HR representative said, her gaze unwavering. Claire's behavior while she was here caused significant disruptions, and your association with her, whether intentional or not, has impacted your credibility. Daniel felt the heat rising in his face, a mixture of anger and shame. So what does this mean? He asked. The room fell silent for a moment before one of the superiors spoke again. We've decided to reassign you to a different team, effective immediately. This isn't a demotion, but it is a reflection of our concern for maintaining a professional work environment. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He nodded stiffly, too stunned to argue. Understood, he said. His voice clipped. As he left the building that night, the weight of everything he'd lost pressed down on him. His reputation at work, his relationship with Emily, both had been tainted by his choices. And while he'd managed to avoid outright disaster, the consequences of his actions were undeniable. That night, Daniel sat in the living room, staring blankly at the television. Emily walked in, carrying 2 cups of tea. She hesitated when she saw his expression. Rough day? She asked gently. You could say that, he replied. They're reassigning me at work. Apparently, I've become a liability. Emily sat down next to him, placing the tea on the table. I'm sorry, Daniel. I know how much your work means to you. He looked at her, his eyes filled with frustration and regret. This is my fault, all of it. If I hadn't let things with Claire get out of hand, none of this would have happened. Emily reached for his hand, surprising him. You made mistakes, big ones, but you're not the only one trying to rebuild. We're in this together, remember? Her words, though comforting, didn't erase the knot in Daniel's chest. Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were? He asked quietly. Emily shook her head. I don't think we can go back, but maybe we can move forward. Build something new, something stronger. The next day brought an unexpected development. Emily received a call from Claire. The number was unfamiliar, but when she heard the voice on the other end, she froze. Emily, it's Claire. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. Please. Emily's first instinct was to hang up, but curiosity and a strange sense of closure made her stay on the line. What do you want, Claire? She asked, her tone sharp. I wanted to apologize, Claire said. For everything. For the pain I caused you. I didn't realize the extent of it until recently, and I need you to know that I'm sorry. Emily was silent for a moment, processing the unexpected apology. Why now? She asked. Why not months ago when you were in the middle of it? Claire's voice faltered. Because I didn't want to admit what I'd done. I thought I was just filling a void. But looking back, I see how selfish I was, and I see how much it hurt you. I know I can't undo it, but I needed to say it. Emily's grip on the phone tightened. She wanted to lash out, to tell Claire exactly what she thought of her, but instead, she took a deep breath. Thank you for saying that, she said finally. I hope you find what you're looking for. When she hung up, Emily felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward letting go of the anger that had been consuming her. The climax of their journey came during one of their final counseling sessions. The therapist asked them to write letters to each other, detailing their feelings and what they hoped for the future. Emily's letter was raw and honest, filled with both her pain and her hope. You broke my heart, Daniel, she wrote, but you also reminded me of my own strength. I'm not the same person I was when we started this journey. And if we're going to make this work, you can't be the same either. Daniel's letter was an outpouring of his regret and love. I took you for granted, Emily. I see that now. I let my pride and my fears drive a wedge between us, but I'm ready to fight for us. For you. For the life we've built together. When they read their letters aloud in the session, both of them were in tears. The therapist smiled softly. "It's clear you both still care deeply for each other. Now it's up to you to decide if that's enough to move forward. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sharing your thoughts helps us bring more of these compelling stories to life." As the months passed, the stakes in Daniel and Emily's journey climbed higher. Their therapy sessions grew more challenging, peeling back layers of hurt that neither had fully acknowledged. For every moment of progress, there were setbacks that tested their fragile trust. The weight of their shared past and uncertain future felt heavier than ever. One evening, Emily returned home to find Daniel sitting at the dining table with a folder open in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his expression a mix of anxiety and determination. "I've been thinking," he began, gesturing for her to sit, "about everything about how I got us here, and I realized I need to show you that I'm serious about rebuilding our life." Emily hesitated before sitting down. "What's this?" she asked, nodding toward the folder. "It's an offer to transfer to another office, a fresh start," he explained. "It's in another city, smaller team, less pressure, I'd still be working, but the hours wouldn't be as crazy. It would give us more time together." Emily's eyes widened. "You'd uproot everything just like that?" Daniel nodded. "If it means giving us a chance to start over. Yes, I know I've been putting work first for years, and I can't keep doing that, not if it means losing you." The offer hung in the air between them, a tangible symbol of Daniel's commitment. Emily's heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, but her own doubts kept her from embracing the idea fully. "It's a big decision," she said finally, "and I'm not sure a change of scenery will fix everything." Daniel reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "I know it won't, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things better, Emily. I don't want to lose you." As they weighed the decision, another complication arose. Claire reappeared, reaching out to Daniel with a request for closure. She claimed to have made peace with her mistakes, but wanted to clear the air before leaving town for good. Against his better judgment, Daniel agreed to meet her, hoping it would provide the final closure he needed to move forward with Emily. They met at a quiet park, the autumn leaves creating a golden canopy overhead. Claire's demeanor was different, subdued, almost apologetic. "I wanted to thank you," she began, her voice soft, "for everything you taught me at work, and for helping me realize what I need to work on in myself." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Claire, I don't think—" "Let me finish," she interrupted. "I know I hurt you and your wife, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to say this before I leave. I really did care about you, Daniel, even if it was wrong." Her words carried a strange finality, and for the first time, Daniel felt a sense of release. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "But I need to focus on my wife now, on fixing what I've broken." Claire smiled faintly, nodding. "I hope you can. She seems like an incredible woman. Don't take her for granted again." As she walked away, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. Truly over. That evening, Daniel told Emily about the meeting with Claire. He didn't want any more secrets between them, even if it risked undoing the progress they'd made. "She reached out to me," he explained. "I met her to hear what she had to say, and I think it helped. It's done, Emily. She's leaving town, and I'm ready to move on with you." Emily listened silently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she let out a deep sigh. "I appreciate you telling me. But Daniel, trust isn't rebuilt overnight. It's going to take time. Maybe a long time." "I know," he said earnestly, "and I'm ready to put in the work." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of decision-making and preparation. After long discussions and many late nights, Emily agreed to give the transfer a chance. They both knew it wasn't a magic solution, but it was a step toward rebuilding their life together. Their final counseling session before the move was bittersweet. The therapist congratulated them on their progress, but reminded them that the real work lay ahead. "Moving away won't erase the past," she said, "but it can give you a chance to write a new chapter. Just remember to keep communicating. That's what got you here." The day of the move came quickly. As they packed the last boxes into the moving truck, Emily paused to take one last look at their house. It was filled with memories, both good and bad, but leaving it behind felt like the right decision. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, a small smile on her lips. "Ready." Their new city was quieter, slower paced. A stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. Daniel's new job allowed him to come home at a reasonable hour, and Emily began exploring opportunities to further her own career. They spent evenings unpacking, cooking together, and rediscovering the small joys of each other's company. One night, as they sat on their porch watching the stars, Emily turned to Daniel. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful." Daniel took her hand, his gaze steady. "Me too," he said, "and I'm not going to take that for granted." If you've made it this far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sharing your thoughts and feedback helps us bring more powerful stories like this one to life. As the days in their new city unfolded, Daniel and Emily slowly began to find their rhythm. The transition wasn't without its challenges: unfamiliar streets, new routines, and the lingering tension that still hung between them. But for the first time in a long while, they were truly making an effort to work as a team. Emily had started teaching again, finding fulfillment in connecting with her students. Daniel, meanwhile, embraced his new role at work. It was a less prestigious position, but it allowed him to focus more on the creative aspects of architecture that he had always loved. And most importantly, it allowed him to be home for dinner. One evening, as they sat across the table eating a simple meal, Emily noticed something different about Daniel. He seemed more relaxed, more present. She felt a flicker of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "This is nice," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I miss this." Daniel smiled, setting his fork down. "Me too. It feels normal, doesn't it? Like we're finding our way back." Emily nodded, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Almost. The progress they were making was tested when an unexpected email arrived in Daniel's inbox one morning. It was from his old company, asking for his help on a project he had spearheaded before leaving. They were in a bind, and his expertise was crucial. The email was flattering, almost pleading, but it brought with it a sense of unease. When Daniel mentioned it to Emily that evening, her reaction was immediate. "You're not seriously considering going back, are you?" she asked, her voice tinged with alarm. "No, of course not," Daniel said quickly. "But they're asking for advice, not for me to come back. It's just one project." Emily's expression tightened. "And how do I know that's all it will be? We moved here to start over, Daniel, to leave all of that behind." "I know," he said, reaching for her hand. "And I don't want to jeopardize that I'll tell them I can't help." But later that night, as Daniel lay awake, the thought nagged at him. The project had been one of his proudest accomplishments, and walking away from it entirely felt like abandoning a piece of himself. Against his better judgment, he replied to the email, offering to review the plans remotely. "Strictly advisory," he assured himself. What started as a quick review turned into a series of emails. Then phone calls. Daniel rationalized it by telling himself he was helping from a distance, that it wouldn't interfere with his new life. But as the weeks went on, Emily began to notice the signs. Late nights at his desk, hushed conversations that ended abruptly when she entered the room. One evening, after finding him working on blueprints long past midnight, she confronted him. "You promised this wouldn't happen again," she said, her voice shaking. "That you wouldn't let work come between us." "It's not like before," Daniel insisted, closing his laptop. "I'm just helping them out. It's temporary." "That's what you said last time," Emily shot back. "And look where it got us." Her words hit Daniel like a slap, and for a moment he couldn't find a response. "You're right," he said finally, his shoulders sagging. "I shouldn't have done this without talking to you first. I'll stop, I promise." But Emily's trust, still fragile, had been shaken again. The tension between them reached a boiling point during an anniversary dinner they had planned weeks in advance. Emily had gone out of her way to make it special. A reservation at a cozy restaurant, a dress she knew Daniel loved. But as they sat across from each other, the conversation felt stilted, forced. Halfway through the meal, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it briefly, but that was enough to break Emily's composure. "Really?" she said, her voice sharp. "You can't even put your phone away for one night?" "It's work," Daniel said, setting the phone face down on the table. "I wasn't going to answer it." "But you thought about it," Emily snapped. "You're always thinking about it. Even when you're here, you're not really here." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emily, I'm trying, I really am. But I can't just shut off my brain." "And I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't keep feeling like I'm fighting for your attention." The argument escalated, their voices rising above the quiet hum of the restaurant. By the time they left, the evening felt irreparably ruined. They drove home in silence, the distance between them palpable. The following days were icy, each of them retreating into their own corners. Emily buried herself in her work, while Daniel doubled down on the project he had promised to abandon. It was a vicious cycle, each of them feeding into the other's frustrations. Then, one evening, Daniel received a call that forced everything into focus. It was from Emily's sister, Megan, who lived a few hours away. Emily had come to visit her, Megan explained, needing time to clear her head. "She's not okay, Daniel," Megan said. "You need to figure this out before you lose her for good." The call was a wake-up call for Daniel. He realized how close he was to losing the one thing he was fighting so hard to save. That night, he packed a bag and drove to Megan's house, determined to make things right. When Daniel arrived, Emily was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket and staring out at the darkened trees. She looked up as he approached, surprise flickering across her face. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I needed to see you," Daniel said, sitting down beside her. "Emily, I know I've screwed up. Again. And I know my promises probably don't mean much right now, but I need you to know that I'm not giving up on us." Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared down at her hands, her expression conflicted. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Daniel. Every time I start to trust you again, something happens to break it." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "and I hate myself for that. But I love you, Emily. More than anything. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you, if you'll let me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Emily let out a deep sigh. "I don't know if love is enough, Daniel, but I want to try." It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional and impactful stories to life. As Daniel and Emily returned home from their emotional weekend at Megan's, they were faced with the reality that rebuilding their marriage would require more than just promises and apologies. The cracks in their relationship were still there, but so was the resolve to mend them. Together, they decided to take one last significant step, a 2-month break from work to focus solely on each other and their healing. Daniel approached his company with a request for unpaid leave, explaining that he needed time to prioritize his personal life. To his surprise, they approved it. Offering their support, Emily arranged for a temporary substitute at her school, knowing that stepping away from her responsibilities would be just as important. With their schedules cleared, the couple planned a quiet retreat in a lakeside cabin a few hours away. It was a deliberate choice. No distractions, no internet, and no lingering shadows from their past lives. Just the two of them, facing the raw truth of what they had almost lost. The first week at the cabin was slow and awkward. Silence often filled the space, and both Daniel and Emily found themselves unsure of how to begin. But gradually, the simplicity of their surroundings started to strip away their defenses. They spent their mornings hiking through the woods, their afternoons reading by the fire, and their evenings talking, really talking, about everything they had avoided for years. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, Emily asked a question that had been on her mind for months. "Daniel, why Claire?" Daniel hesitated, the weight of the question evident in his expression. "I think it wasn't about her. Not really," he admitted. "It was about me. I felt stuck, like I was failing at everything. At work, at home. Claire made me feel like I wasn't a failure, even if it was an illusion. It was selfish and weak, and I hate that I let myself fall into it." Emily nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've spent so much time blaming myself," she said quietly, "wondering if I wasn't enough, or if I did something wrong. But hearing you say that, it helps, because now I see it wasn't about me." "It wasn't," Daniel said firmly. "You've always been enough, Emily, more than enough, and I'm so sorry I made you doubt that." For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to believe him. The second month at the cabin marked a turning point. They rediscovered parts of themselves that had been buried under years of routine and resentment. Emily reconnected with her love for painting, setting up a small easel by the window and losing herself in colors and shapes. Daniel, inspired by her creativity, started sketching again, something he hadn't done since college. One night, as they shared a bottle of wine by the fire, Emily looked at Daniel and smiled. "Do you remember when we used to dream about building a house together? Not just any house. Our house, one that we designed from the ground up?" Daniel chuckled, the memory warming him. "Yeah, I remember we even sketched out blueprints on napkins during that road trip to Maine." Emily's smile grew wistful. Maybe we should start dreaming again. When their retreat ended, Daniel and Emily returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. Their time away hadn't erased the past, but it had given them a foundation to rebuild upon. They resumed counseling, this time with a shared goal of moving forward rather than just addressing their pain. Daniel also made good on his promise to set boundaries with work. He turned down several offers to consult on high-profile projects, focusing instead on smaller, more meaningful ones. Emily, meanwhile, embraced her art, eventually hosting a local gallery exhibit that reignited her passion and brought her joy. The true test of their progress came during their anniversary the following year. This time, there was no grand dinner or elaborate plans. Just a quiet evening at home, cooking together and reflecting on how far they had come. As they sat down to eat, Daniel raised his glass. "To us," he said, "not the US we were before, but the US we're becoming." Emily clinked her glass against his, tears glistening in her eyes. "To us." In the end, Daniel and Emily's journey wasn't about returning to what they once had. It was about creating something new, something stronger and more honest. They learned that love isn't about perfection, but about resilience and choice. Every day, they chose each other, flaws and all. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt and thought-provoking stories to life. See you in the next video.